All right, hello out there. Welcome to another virtual gardening workshop over here at Badger Rock. Today, we are going to be talking about how to plant raspberries. Christina Outlay, this one's for you. I know you've requested this workshop, so here we are. We are going to show you all how to plant raspberries from cuttings of other raspberry plants, but we're also going to talk you through how to plant them if you buy a bare root raspberry or a potted raspberry. So when you go to a garden center at this time of year, usually this happens in the beginning of April, bare root sales start happening, which means you can go to a garden center like Jung's and you can buy fruit trees, you can buy raspberries, you can buy blueberries. A lot of these things are bare root is what they're called because they, a raspberry that you buy as a bare root raspberry will just look like a stick with a root. It's not potted in soil, nothing. It is just a bare root hanging out. So when you do buy bare root plants, they usually come with some moistened cardboard or newspaper around the root to keep those roots moist until you're able to plant them. If you buy a bare root, don't let that paper dry out. Make sure you keep it moist, and then you want to soak that plant. We usually soak them overnight in some water before putting them in the ground, just to really moisten it, wake it up. So bare root plants are great. The bare root raspberries are great. That's what we got when we started our raspberry patch, was bare root, also blackberries. And when you plant them, the things to keep in mind are, number one, make sure you keep those roots moist until you plant them. Number two, soak them overnight, usually is what we do until you plant them. Number three, make sure when you find your spot that you are planting them in as sunny of a spot as you can. The more sun, the more fruit. And number four, you want to make sure that soil is nice and loose and that you add some compost so that it has the nutrients that it needs, and so there's also some good drainage. Because while they really want their roots to stay moist, they don't want their roots to be waterlogged. That will cause rot, and your raspberry could not make it if it's too waterlogged. But you also don't want it to dry out. Compost is the best of both worlds because it's like a sponge. It holds moisture, but it's not like a waterlogged type of situation because it also helps with drainage and helping move water on through the system. So raspberries are really cool because you can kind of see how they go along as you look at the last year's plants. So these right here, like a stem of a raspberry plant is called a cane. These are the canes that made fruit last year. So they make these little lateral, like sideways branches, and on those branches are where they bear the fruit. So you can see this little thing here, these little guys. Those were where last year's raspberries were growing. Raspberries make a cane on their first year called a primo cane. That cane is just fresh growth. It just grows for that season and does not make any fruit, but it survives through the winter till the next year when it becomes what's called a flora cane, which is the second year growth. That second year growth is when these little sideways branches start to grow and raspberries will get produced. After those raspberries are produced on that flora cane, the next season it dies. And so that's when it's time to prune out those flora canes. You can see when we cut these, those are dead. You can tell because they're brown in the middle of the cane. If you cut a cane out of your raspberry patch and it's green in the middle, even if it looks like there's no leaves, they get dormant in the winter. So they will all look dead in the winter, but some of them are going to come right back in the spring and start making leaves again. Look at the difference between these flora canes that are dead from last year's fruit and these guys right here. They look a little different, right? The branches are kind of smooth and kind of a lighter brown. These dead ones are looking a little waxy, and if you try to snap them, they just snap. If you try to snap the living ones, they'll bend. They're really supple, and that's another hint that they're alive without having to cut into it and see if it's green or not. So a really easy way, if you don't want to buy raspberries, is go and find a raspberry patch or a friend's raspberry patch or a wild raspberry patch, and you can take cuttings of your own to grow your own raspberries. So I'm going to show you all how to do that. We're going to look down here Right here, I see a few things going on. You can see how this one has got that waxy look to it, and it looks like when you snap it, the branches just snap right off because they are brown and dead. That is last year's fruiting branch. That's last year's floricane. We're going to just prune that right out. So you have to prune your raspberries every year too, to make sure that you get the dead stuff out. You also need to contain them because raspberries can spread underground and pop up new growth. So make sure, really this is the time of year to prune raspberries also before they start to leaf out. You want to make sure you get all that dead growth out, and you also want to make sure you contain them. If you have little canes starting to pop up here, here, they're starting to march out of the zone where you want them, you can just prune those off to keep your raspberries in a 1 to 3 foot row is kind of the ideal for raspberries to keep them contained. Also, if you're planting them near a fence line, make sure your neighbors know that you have raspberries because they could start popping up over there too. And if they don't want them, they can just prune them out. If they do want them, great. You just shared some raspberries with your neighbor. I would love a neighbor like that myself. So you want to make sure that you are getting some of that fresh growth. Ideally, you want to get a prima cane for taking cuttings. And what you would do is just cut this cane out, and you want to look and see where the buds are. So you can see right here, there's a little bud right here. There's a little bud right here. There's a little bud right here. You can cut this branch into 6-inch pieces. I like to use my body as a measuring tool because I don't like to carry around, measuring tape all the time. This is about 6 inches from the tip of your thumb to the tip of your pinky, like that. So you want to make sure that you're cutting about 6-inch pieces, and you want to cut right below a bud on the bottom and cut at a slant so that you know which way is up and which way is down so that you don't accidentally plant your raspberry upside down. So now I've made a little cut right underneath the bud. Can y'all see that? And you want to make sure on your cutting you have at least 2 buds. Ideally, you might have a few more, like 3 or 4. And then you're going to make another cut about 6 inches up. And here you have this little guy that looks like a stick. Look in the middle. See how it looks green? That's how you know you are picking a living one instead of the dead floricanes from last year's fruit. And then what you can do is 2 different ways of rooting these. You can put them in some water and make sure that you submerge that first bud completely underneath the water. Put them in a mason jar or a cup and just let them sit in that water until the roots start to form. And once you have good, solid, strong roots, you can then plant them outside. Or you can also just get them to root straight outside in the soil. So I'm just going to, from this branch, you can see this is almost past the time for pruning because you can see these little buds are starting to make new growth. Those are this year's leaves starting to come out. So I'm going to, again, make sure I get about a 6-inch piece. I'm going to cut at a slant so I know where I'm at, what's the top and what's the bottom. And I'm going to just do this all the way up this cane. Measure again, cut again. And what you're going to end up with is a whole bunch of raspberries that you can plant. All right. Once you get these cut and ready to go, you can, like I said, either put them in water or you can root them right in the ground. So I'm going to show you how to root them in the ground right now. So, and this is actually how you would plant a raspberry too. So basically you want to dig into the soil, and you want to dig, if you're planting a bare root raspberry, you want to make sure that that hole is big enough that you can spread those roots out, that they're not all clumped together. They have room to spread and room to grow. That's going to encourage them to grow outwards and have a more healthy raspberry for you. And you want to dig that hole maybe about 8 to 12 inches deep. And then you want to add in some compost, like I said. Both for nutrition for the plant, compost is Mother Nature's very best fertilizer, and for the drainage. So I'm going to get a little compost of this wheelbarrow over here, and I'm going to just mix a little compost into this hole. Compost is really easy to make on your own too. We'll do another workshop on how to make compost coming up. And then if you have potted raspberries, you want to make sure that you don't plant that raspberry deeper than where the top of the soil is on the pot. So check out where that is. And raspberries also have crowns. So you'll see when you buy a potted raspberry, there's about 1 inch of the crown, and that the crown is the spot where the canes start to grow. You want to make sure you're not burying that crown. You want it to be about 1 inch above the top of the soil. All right, so here's my little canes that I just cut. If I wanted to root them right here on the soil, I would just make sure they're facing the right direction, and you can just pop them in there. Put your compost back in. Snug them up just a little bit, but you don't want to pack them in because you want the soil to remain nice and loose. And if you're starting these for roots to move someplace else, you would just leave them in here. Make sure you water them pretty frequently, like maybe 2-3 times a week till they can get started, and the roots will start to grow. Once they have pretty good, vigorous looking roots, you can dig them out and move them to wherever you like. So that is a way to root new raspberries in just whatever kind of soil you have. You can also do this in a pot and then move them to wherever you like. When you plant raspberries, you want to make sure to plant them at least 2 or 3 feet apart from each other because they will grow. Look how big these are and how much space they take up. You also might want to consider building a trellis. A really easy way to build a trellis is to take 2 fence posts, stick them on one side of your patch, take 2 fence posts, stick them on the other side of your patch, and put some wire zigzagging across. So as the canes start to grow up, when they try to flop over, that wire will catch them and it'll keep them upright so that they'll have plenty of airflow, and so that fruit is at the right height for you to pick. Another thing that can happen with raspberries, some varieties and lots of varieties of blackberries, is if they do flop all the way over to the ground, sometimes they will grow roots from their cane right here, and then they'll send up a new growth, and then that one will march along and grow roots, and then you have this bramble starting to grow. So watch out for that because like I said, some varieties of raspberries will do that. Lots of varieties of blackberries, they're going to try to travel on you. If you don't want them to travel, you got to keep them contained. You can also grow raspberries in a pot. It's not ideal, but if you really want to make sure to contain them, that's one way to do it because their roots really can't go anywhere in a pot. Just watch out, like I said, for them to, if they hit the ground with their canes and they root, you're going to end up with a little marching situation. Once you plant your raspberries too, in this nice loose soil with plenty of compost, about 2 to 3 feet apart from each other. These I planted closer because they're not going to live here permanently. We're just rooting them. Then it's a great idea to put some straw or wood chips around them. Wood chips are fine for raspberries. Straw works too. That's going to help hold the moisture in the soil and help keep the weeds from growing to mulch around your raspberries. So yeah, that's just a little Propagating Raspberries 101. Make sure though that you look at the variety that you bought because like I said, there's lots of varieties of raspberries. Some varieties fruit on first-year canes, some fruit on second-year canes, some bramble, some less so. So make sure you read about what particular variety you have and how to best plant it and care for it. And oh my gosh, fresh raspberries in the summer, there's nothing like it. And if you get a variety of raspberry called everbearing, they make fruit in the fall. And that fruit is usually on the prima canes. So you can check out everbearing raspberries as well. But if you live in a place with a really early frost, if you're pretty far north, those type can be tricky to grow because sometimes they'll fruit just as the frost gets to them and nips them. So yeah, these are summer bearing raspberries, which is most of the varieties you'll find. But try out some everbearing too. It's really nice when school starts back up again for us to have some fresh raspberries to share with our students. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments, pop them in the comments and we'll be happy to get back to you. Otherwise, if you're getting some raspberries to plant this season, enjoy the fruits of your labor. They are so productive, so delicious, so good for you. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.